Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, your Kings insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Mr. Brenden Nunes from the Kings Herald and the Kings Pulse podcast. What's going on, Brenden?
Not too much, James. Had a good time at the draft viewing party, at least hanging out with everybody. I think we'll get a little bit more into the results of the draft night, but it was at least enjoyable.
All right. And of course, Mr. Sean Cunningham from Fox 40. What's going on, Sean?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. Great morning. And I actually finally got to wear my Rihanna t-shirt, which is, I just got to bring this up just a little bit so you can see there.
Yeah.
Okay. There
All
we
right.
are.
Is that still your screensaver on your phone?
He showed everyone yesterday. Let me check.
Let me check, because things have changed. There's a lot that's happened over the past few... Yes, it is.
Of course it is.
Yes. And it could have a little bit of a significant symbolic meaning today.
Oh.
The day after the NBA draft.
All right.
There's some saltiness out there.
There's some saltiness. We're gonna go pretty long here on the NBA draft that happened on Thursday night. We would have brought you a podcast from Golden One Center following the draft, but two things. Number one, the Kings wouldn't let us have anywhere to podcast. I was told that leading up to the draft. No, they told us they would not make any. We weren't going to be given a spot to podcast later. Number two, even though the Kings didn't do anything after like 5:15 in the draft, we waited until 10 o'clock for Monty McNair's press conference. So that also limited what we could do as well. So we pushed the podcast to today. Not bitter at all. Not at all. The food was fine. The Kings, the practice facility was amazing. They had a table set up for us to sit and plug in our computers and sit there. They had TVs everywhere. They had this draped off area and this huge press conference area. But I don't know. Let's start there. Did the draft go as you guys expected?
Well, no.
No. Can anyone say yes?
No.
The draft not only went nowhere as I expected, neither did the processes of the draft. I mean, we didn't even get to talk to the pick.
Yeah, Sean is bent. Just so everyone knows, Sean is bent that we didn't talk to Keegan Murray.
Well, and you should be too.
No, I totally agree. I was. I am just as. But I didn't know. No one came over and told me, hey, we're not getting Keegan Murray.
Right.
I didn't ask. I just assumed that there was going to be a moment where they came over and said, hey, everyone huddle around a phone like we always do, and we're going to get the pick. Or let's open up a Zoom call and you'll get the pick. No.
I don't want to harp on it because there are definite reasons for it, but it's more of an apology for really what is being the only team that drafted, especially that drafted in the lottery, that you didn't really get to hear from. You didn't really get to have your local media provide you some content from that. So it's tough, but it is what it is, and hopefully hopefully that's the last time. But in terms of the draft, no, it didn't go. It didn't really. I won't say that I was surprised because certainly we all knew that there was a big interest in Keegan Murray. I thought, for me, I just feel like there might have been a little bit of a move to get Keegan Murray. Maybe fall down a little bit and try and get something else, and then take him at 5 or 6. Thought that might have been possible. Didn't know that you would have to do it at 4. But at the end of the day, if they got the guy that they wanted, and they're unified on that, I don't know that I believe Monty McNair when he says that it's that everybody was all in 100% unanimous, that they say that they felt that Keegan Murray was the best player available. However you define that, there's a lot of people in that room, and I don't, unless some of those people lie to us or things like that. I don't know that I believe that, but whatever. As long as you are unified as a team, you can certainly see their reaction when they drafted him. I truly believe that Monty McNair got his guy, if that makes sense. And that at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. We can all have our opinions. Our opinions, as we've talked about, are not fact, and it's his job on the line. It's the front office jobs on the line. They're the ones that are supposed to do it. So I can understand the disappointment out there, but at the end of the day, I think they really got themselves a hell of a player. So, draft grades for people who make them hours, days after the draft don't mean anything, and you'll be able to grade this draft 3 years from now. And I think the one thing that's undeniable is the skill set, the talent that Keegan Murray brings to this team should, and I hate using the word should fit in rather nicely with a piece like Domantas Sabonis.
Why, yes, he should, Sean. Couldn't have said it better myself. I think a big part of yesterday was expecting fireworks and getting absolutely nothing. I do really like Keegan Murray, and I feel like it's unfair to Keegan that there's going to be all this extra things attached to him, and there's always going to be Jaden Ivey attached to him, and was he taken too high? And it's just, I guess this happens with every draft prospect, but it feels like even more extreme in the situation that Sacramento was in last night. And I think that taking Keegan with the 4th pick is, I see why it could have been difficult to trade down and still secure Keegan. Like, what if Detroit is sitting there at 5 and thinking that they don't care between Keegan and Ivy? We're going to take whichever one's available. And so then if you can't trade with Detroit, you're not getting Keegan if you move down. You don't know what the other team's boards were looking like. It wouldn't surprise me if Detroit liked Ivy better than Keegan, so I certainly would have liked to see a move and trade down, but I could see why maybe that's complicated, and if they do really like Keegan, then I don't hate them taking their guy. Like, it just, there needs to be more. And I think that that's where my frustration is. I know that I'm going to very much like Keegan Murray as a player. I think he's the type of player and person that the Kings need. Like, the Kings at this point have a little bit of, I think we can notice some trends now in Monty McNair's draft history, because there's 3 first-round picks now. Every single one of those guys, Tyrese Halliburton, Davion Mitchell, now Keegan Murray, extremely high-character guys who were already good at the time of college, and high-floor guys as well is kind of what I think they were all labeled as. And they all have, they're all talked about as having extremely high work ethics, and at some point in their development curve had an outlier spike. So if you're betting on the person that Keegan Murray is, which is kind of what I got as Monty McNair trying to sell us, that Keegan Murray also is a very good basketball player, but we're also betting on the person to take it beyond that, then Keegan Murray at 4, I am okay with. It's after that where I get a little bit lost, and there's so many more moves that need to be made from here on until the start of next season.
Okay, so
his answer surprised me, James.
What's his answer surprised you?
Yeah, a
Who,
little bit.
Monty's?
No, sorry, Brendan's.
Oh, okay.
Because Brenden famously had kind of a little bit of a mini meltdown regarding Keegan Murray, and if they draft Keegan Murray. So
famously.
Did that change your thinking, Brenden?
It didn't.
He's going through the stages of grief.
I really am. I really am.
He's got to acceptance. We're at acceptance. That's what's happening here, Sean.
It's kind of that I felt like it became unfair to Keegan, including like probably a handful of things that I said. I do think that it could totally be a regret passing on Jaden Ivey. I think that it could absolutely be the wrong decision. But once it's like official that Keegan is the guy we're going to be covering, he's a member of the Sacramento Kings, like Keegan Murray is a guy that I really like as a basketball player. I don't know, it's just the valuation of pick number 4 is tough, but I do really like Keegan.
Okay, Brenden, brace yourself, because here comes the blowtorch from James. brace yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are like rationalizing at this point. That's what happens in this situation.
Yes, if we recorded last night, I would have been way more heated.
Number one, I will tell you this: the Kings fed Woj like stories. They fed him leading up to the finals. They fed him earlier this week about the number 4 pick. His words were very clear that the Kings believe that there is a huge drop-off from pick number 4 to pick number 5, and that Jaden Ivey is the 4th pick, and that teams are coming up to get him, blah, 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 blah. The Kings believe that there is a huge drop-off from 4 to 5. There is no way that the Kings were trying to hold off other teams that were trying to move to the 3rd pick to draft Keegan Murray and steal their guy. There's no way. So what exactly happened? Because I'll tell you what happened. What happened is, like my guy Kenny Caraway said, you done got played by the Detroit Pistons. You wouldn't call their bluff. You wouldn't draft Jaden Ivey at number 4 and force them to give something up to move to swap 4 for 5. So look, we've talked about this a bunch of times. My issue is not Keegan Murray. I like Keegan Murray. I like Keegan Murray as a prospect. I think he's probably 5th through 7 as far as players in this draft. So there's not even that big of a reach. The problem is that the Sacramento Kings are like 4 rotational players away from being close to a playoff team, and they just blew the one opportunity that's a legit. You only got 3 opportunities to improve your team, right? The draft, trades, and free agency. Free agency, just take out and flush down the toilet. Sacramento Kings' best player they've ever signed in free agency is Vlade Divac. That's the best player they've ever signed in free agency. So you just got done with the draft and you only got 1 player. What next? How are you going to improve the roster? Because as of right now, you're a 36 to 38 win team at best. So what are you going to do? And the question starts to become, are you just not a closer? Because every single time we hear these deals are close, they go somewhere else, or you don't close them. Does the Kings front office have an issue with closing the deal? And I don't care what they have to give up, all that stuff. We'll talk about the 2nd-round picks. To me, was just the biggest joke I've ever seen. The fact that they made a pick at 535 or whatever, and then nothing else except for going backwards for the next 6 hours. Like, I don't know. Like, I was so underwhelmed with the entire evening. And this is not about Keegan Murray, because Keegan Murray is going to be a rotational player in Sacramento for the next decade. He is a starter. He is a quality starter. I don't know if he's a plus starter. He's a quality starter. I think he can be a really good, multifaceted player, and he fits perfectly. I agree on all of those things. But when you draft Keegan Murray, who is a 4, it basically ends your pursuit of John Collins, which might have been the only player that you could have brought in to like sort of up the quality of play. Now, that deal is pretty much, to me, I mean, maybe you go make that deal and then we get to spend 3 months with them trying to convince us that Keegan Murray can play the 3.
I think he can.
No. Well, I mean, you can think he can, and just
James
like
says no.
Mike Krzyzewski said that Marvin Bagley can play the 3. Or who was it that, Pete Carrill tried to convince Paul Westphal that Jason Thompson could play the 3. Keegan Murray's a 4. He moves like a 4. Like lateral quickness wise, that's his position. Like maybe he can play a couple of minutes at the 3, but
I think he can guard, 1 through, or not 1. I don't think 1. There's his coach today, when I spoke to Fran McCaffrey, thought he could guard 1 through 5. I'm not convinced of that. I hope he's right, because that'll suit
so
him
could
very
Willie
well.
Cauley-Stein. Yeah, he could guard 1 through 5.
But he can definitely guard 3 through 5, maybe 2 through 5. I think there's.
We'll see. We'll see at the NBA level, because I don't think so.
He had some really good moments against Johnny Davis.
Yeah, and we can get more into that later. But I want to unpack a couple things that you guys both said, and I'm just going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. It's not because I agree with the contrary of what you guys said, but just to pose a different outlook here. I'll start with Brenden because Brenden had mentioned, and I don't want to lose sight of it, about the excitement for the draft, your anticipation for the draft, things you were expecting. I think it's just, again, a reminder that the expectations, you control your own expectations. By the intel you have, you can't take the temperature of the room by reading reports and rumors. Like that's why I caution people all the time. Like if you're reading all these reports about things that are going to happen, those are still rumors, man. Nothing is fact until it happens. So you control your own expectations and emotions as a fan and as a media member walking into this thing. Certainly you can have expectations within your mind and say, okay, but you have to prepare yourself for pretty much anything. And the more drafts you go through, especially if you're a Kings fan, to me, you can have the disagreement of whether they should have picked somebody or whatever, have your feelings, that's great. But I think you should have solace in the fact that organizationally, if they make a pick or feel a certain way, that ultimately is the more, like, you can't have situations where it comes out and it's like, oh, the room was split. You know, you don't have this whole, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but everyone's going to have opinions. Everybody does, even within the organization. If you take them at face value and at their word, and again, I don't necessarily believe them, but again, if Monty McNair if he got the guy he wanted all along, that to me I think is a good thing. Okay. The other thing I'll say is even with James mentioning the Woj report, like I think both things can be true. I think, you know, I know that there had been so many talks, and the one thing that I think stood true was the value of 4. And even if the value of 4, you have the value of 4, and then you have their belief that they want Keegan Murray the most of those, once those 3 are off the board, because I think they had other players a little bit higher, had someone like Chet Holmgren been available. But obviously 1 through 3 is gone. I think both things can be true. They wanted Keegan Murray, but they also wanted a very high value to move out of the 4. And I think a lot of what came out in reports prior to the draft was a lot of posturing. Just an incredible amount of posturing.
Totally.
So it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing happened. And granted, after they made their pick, and I mean, obviously they made trades. They traded their second round picks. It doesn't mean that things weren't happening. There's things that didn't get consummated, and a lot of what happens on draft day might play out in the weeks to come. Hopefully that's the case. But I do agree with the disappointment, James, because I agree with the fact that at 4 they took Keegan Murray and they weren't able to necessarily find solutions from other teams by getting creative to move around. That's not for maybe lack of trying, so I don't want to necessarily hit them over top of the head. But it is frustrating when you see a move like Jeremy Grant, and it involves the Detroit Pistons, and
they got him for nothing.
But the Pistons also, they just played their bluff, right? Like, they may have had conversations about certain guys, and the Pistons were convinced that, hey, they're not going to take our guy. They're not going to take Jaden Ivey. And if they do, Keegan Murray will look fantastic in a Detroit Pistons uniform. You know what I mean? So I think it was one of the, like a not a boy who cried wolf necessarily, but it's like poker. They just knew you had nothing. They just knew that okay, go ahead and draft Jaden Ivey, and we'll be fine with the alternative. But we really like Jaden Ivey, but we're not going to give you any of our pieces, especially for the asking price that you have. And it's basically just calling your bluff.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that they overplayed their hand a bit, for sure. And then at the end of the day, they couldn't make anything happen. And look, I at 10 o'clock on Wednesday night, I put out my final mock draft. And in that, I had them taking Keegan Murray. And I think the love of Keegan Murray played a huge part of this. Like, they fell in love with Keegan Murray. And so that made it less likely for them to move down because they were worried they would miss out on him if they did move down. I get that. But again, you're a team that's so far away. And the teams around you, it's not that Jeremy Grant got traded. Jeremy Grant got traded to one of your main competitors for a low-level playoff spot. So not only did you not get him, but your competition got him. And that's a problem.
In the West.
In the West, yeah. Like that's a big deal. That adds to the failure of that specific thing. And maybe Jeremy Grant's not on your list. Maybe he's not someone that you want. But I mean, Portland wanted him, and they're a team that's probably going to be better than you. They've got a good shot because they were aggressive and they went out and did things to shake it up. And I just feel like the Kings, I think the value that they placed on Keegan was so incredibly high that they weren't willing to do something that risked not getting him. And that plays into a larger question. They didn't interview anyone else. They didn't. I don't care what they say. I sat on all of these prospect interviews, all of these Zoom calls. They were in the building at Jaden Ivey's workout. Vivek Ranadive sitting courtside. We saw him with a hat on, sitting right next to Monty McNair. Other teams talked to him that day and then set up workouts. OKC talked to him that day, set up workouts. He said, I never met with the Kings. So they went and watched him. Where's the conversation? That's part of this.
Well,
you need to get your hands on these guys. You need to have conversations.
Yeah. It's like we've talked about, though. People were bypassing Sacramento, and a lot of that is because they believe they would probably move the pick. A lot of that is due to the lack of success. And if you're Jaden Ivey and you're his people, you don't necessarily want to pair him next to De'Aaron Fox when Cade Cunningham might be a better solution for him to absolutely blossom. So
I think, though, Sean, my point is this. If you interview Benedict Mathurin, you interview Dyson Daniels, you go out and do a bunch of work on AJ Griffin and on all of these prospects, you may fall in love with one of those guys as well, and it could open the door for you to not be so staunch at number 4 and falling in love with Keegan Murray. You could have fallen in love with somebody else as well that could also be a really good player. And I think by not doing the work and not getting those guys in the building, I don't care if they watch film on these guys. I watch film on all these guys too. I don't care. Get your hands on these guys. Interview these guys. And to me, that's where I take sort of an issue with the way that where you had Keegan Murray and Jeremy Sohan through, and that's it.
Well, and that's what I was getting at too, is you building up a guy in Ivy who'd probably rather not be there. Again, if he was drafted, he'll show up. I mean, that's his team now. He's not going to screw up his professional career.
He's not going to.
Right.
They could have a situation where someone won't sign their contract.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Look, as much as the agency might say, hey, maybe we can work out a trade and explore those options, he's going to cooperate, man. It's going to happen. But my point is, I believe Monty about look. It's you don't necessarily need to have your hands on all these guys. You would like to still do your job, right? To still do your due diligence, if you will, because we can't say that so much. But I think the other thing could be true as well, which is I kept asking those questions about those workouts yesterday. One, because it was the first time we talked to Monty during and for the whole process. But just wondering how much of a challenge it created, because then they ultimately took the guy, one of the guys that they had the communication and all that contact with, had him in their building, took him to dinner, that kind of stuff, showed him a little bit of the city. So by virtue of having done that, and you can say the other ones it didn't take you away from drafting the person, but you clearly went with the one that you did, one of the few that you did. How much did that make a difference? To that point, also taking somebody that wanted to be in Sacramento, that's something. I mean, that reeks also of what Tyrese Halliburton's situation from 3 years ago it was, with Davion Mitchell. Had no contact with Sacramento, really. I mean, it was no workout, and so you went best player available, and you took him, and that's worked out pretty well so far. But clearly, I think having a player who wanted to be here and identified that he wanted to be here, whether he'll say it to you or not, I think played a rather big factor. Just in the situation, because again, you had him in your building, you had your vets around him. I think one of the reasons I think this also happened was you had key members of your team not only meet with this person, but probably provide feedback. And if you're De'Aaron Fox and they've the first 2 drafts of your front office have been drafting players that play your position, I think you're probably voicing, hey, I'd like a stretch 4, I'd like a wing player. These are the conversations you're having. And after meeting with Keegan Murray, I fully believe that De'Aaron Fox would have rather had Keegan Murray than Jaden Ivey, and I don't think that's going to surprise anybody, right?
No, I think that's totally the spot on. Brenden, what do you? We've kind of, Sean and I have gone back and forth here, left you out. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No worries. I mean, the interview process and all that and pre-draft process is new to me, or a new perspective this season. So it's interesting to hear you guys talk about that. I think the point of somebody that wanted to be there, and I think the reason that I'm, I guess, a lot different in the way that I'm presenting and seem to be going about this than I was previously is I'm just going to choose to trust for a second until I'm proven otherwise, or until it goes sour. Like if Monty says that that's who he thinks the best guy is available, and maybe it'll work out. Maybe I'm wrong. What do I know? These guys are putting way more time into this than I am. So maybe I am wrong about this, and hopefully Keegan really was the guy. I got really thrown off by the unanimous thing that Sean pointed out earlier. To say it was unanimous in the room that every single person thought that he was best player available, when the consensus goes against that, like, it just doesn't. It's not even like we expect everybody in the room to have the same guy. Like, I think it's good to have varying opinions and presenting both sides and then coming to a conclusion that maybe some people don't agree on. Like, I don't understand why that was said. That one really stood out to me. And it feels like there's so much of, like, last year's team was kind of hard to watch. There were some personalities that were not the most enjoyable.
It was horrible, Brenden.
Yeah,
they won 30
horrible.
games.
And
they
I
lost 52.
I gotta say, I think this year's team is, like, going to put a better product on the floor. I think a decent amount has to do with the trades that they made last season, just the Sabonis and having him for 60 seasons, Buddy and Bagley being gone. Like, I do think that the team is a lot more likely to get along and play for each other and start to build a good culture in Sacramento. Like, that is the one positive I feel like I can take here, is that I feel like they are consistently bringing in high character guys who have really high work ethics. And if all of those guys really get along and are out there fighting for each other and pushing each other, like, I could see a way that it works, but clearly I'm justifying this to myself right now. And I'm just going to choose to try to see their vision until it doesn't go that way.
Okay, I want to, going back to Sean's point, I'm going to say this. They just gave the roadmap to not going to Sacramento. And let's not fool ourselves. This team could be in the exact same position next year, because as of right now, this is a bad team. Straight up, it's a bad team. So Vlade Divac's got so much, like, flack for saying that, you know, if he doesn't want to work out for Vlade doesn't want to draft him, right? That's what he said about Emmanuel Mudiay. The Kings just did the same thing. Monty McNair just did the same exact thing. He just didn't say it. You don't want to work out for Monty? Well, Monty ain't going to draft you at number 4. Like, so
but
every team every agent, every team, there is a roadmap to get out of Sacramento. I know that for sure, because I know that at least one free agent that left here has given that roadmap to other players to get out of Sacramento, the words and things to say to get out of Sacramento. Now we have a roadmap for how to not get drafted by the Kings. You just don't show up.
Look, far be it for me to disagree, but again, just having to point it out, like they got Davion Mitchell. They did it with Davion Mitchell just the year before, who had practically no contact. So I hear you. I think but again, if again, the one little caveat though is if Keegan Murray was your guy the whole time, and you were doing everything to basically convince yourself of not drafting Keegan Murray at number 4, and doing everything you could to trade, and it just doesn't come to fruition, and you just draft the guy you got, I can buy that on the surface level. However, it's just, to me, very, very interesting that you were able you drafted the one guy you got to visit with.
Doing everything is having interviews with every single player that you can, so you are informed when you make that decision.
Yeah.
Because it's more than about basketball. It's about who they are as people, what kind of personality they have. Like, it's so much more. And like this franchise has shown me for the last 12 years that I've covered them that they don't know how to interview people at all. That they are like as a whole, they don't know how to interview and hire people at all. And now we're in a situation where they literally just didn't interview a bunch of people.
Yeah. To that point, maybe just to kind of double down a bit on that though, is whether or not it played a role. Certainly, whether it does or doesn't, or you put credence to getting people in your building or not, as a factor in this draft process going forward. If you're that front office, if you're the Kings in general, regardless, you have to change the perception of your organization around the league, and you have to do a lot of work to clean that up.
I agree 100%. Okay, so
open doors. You have to open some doors. Yeah.
Even through all the difficulties that come with people not wanting to go to Sacramento, like it goes both ways. It's on both sides here, right? The front office should have been more active in searching guys even through the difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there could have been more done. And I get it. They're going to say, oh, we did everything to, like, no, you didn't. Like, that's just not the case. It's just not the case. So, like, there are too many players that did not speak to the Kings. I know. They told us. Like, Tari Eason, he spoke to the Kings. He had kept in contact with the Kings. The only one that really, we know was all over Sacramento was Keegan. And so, again, like, you interviewed one player, like, truly interviewed one player for the number 4 pick in the draft. So, all right. So if you're listening right now to the Kings Beat podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to give us a thumbs up and go down below and subscribe. We're growing quickly, and it's been amazing to see all of the new people jumping in. We would have liked to have done this one live last night. That didn't happen for a myriad of reasons. But also jump on board with the Kings Beat. Again, growing. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to have a happy hour coming up. I don't have the guest date yet, so I'm not going to say who the guest is yet, but or guests. But we're going to do something very soon.
Can I clean something up real quick?
Yeah.
I think it's probably a good thing we didn't go live last night.
Oh, yeah.
I agree.
I think it was, so James mentioned that the Kings wouldn't give us a room to do the podcast, and that is true. However, there was a concert going on. The Kings didn't have control of the arena. They probably could have found something, maybe the lobby, but there would have been a lot of commotion and people walking through, and I think we would have been fine with that. I'll be honest, especially at just the way the night progressed. I was ready to get my drink after work, and I did. So I think it was a blessing in disguise. So I will thank the Kings organization for not allowing us to have a room.
I probably would have said a few things that I would have wished that I didn't, and that's without having a few drinks. Because I just like the entire evening, just the way it played out. And look, here, let's get to, like, we'll move on from Keegan. I'm sure his name will be mentioned like 47 times more before we're done here. But it wasn't just the number 4 pick that's, like, led to, like, some severe head scratching. Number 1, Rashawn Holmes is still on the roster. and you just got through the draft. Number 2, Harrison Barnes is still on the roster. Number 3, you didn't pick anyone else up. Number 4, you traded the 49th pick for Sasha Vezenkov, who may or may not come over. Monty McNair would not, under any circumstance, tell us whether they're going to try to bring him over this year. I think that they literally sold the pick for $1.75 million, and that's it. So that's what happened with that pick. And then the number 37 pick is going to, it could go down in infamy. Like, you had what was considered coming into this season a top 5 player in Jaden Hardy, who had a very rough go at the Ignite, but in a 12-game sample size, super small sample size, he falls all the way to number 37, and the Kings traded that for a 2024 and 2028 pick to the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks, of course, were in the Western Conference Finals this last year. They have a 23-year-old superstar. The chance of them being horrible over the next 2 years is slim. So what is that pick going to be? In the 50s? The fact that he's only 23, we don't even know how good that 2028 pick is going to be. All I can say is the people who just collected those picks, the chance of them being here to see those 2 picks play out, super slim. And on top of that, the Kings don't have a player walking into the season, because Keegan Murray will turn 22 in August. They don't have a player under 22 years old. They don't have a young player sitting there to groom and a prospect, a second-round pick that they can work with to develop. And you had the 7th pick in the second round, and you gave it away for what amounts to a bag of peanuts 4 years from now. So, am I wrong?
Not at all. I think that it's also hilarious that he was in the draft room, and just the fact that there's a picture of him in a Kings hat, and you can just already, it's very easy to picture how last night ends up coming back to not paint the Kings in the brightest light. And I think that even almost an optics point of view, like, you could really sell the upside of a Jaden Hardy, or there's a handful of other guys they could have considered at this pick. Like, I liked E.J. Liddell, who I was surprised was falling. I don't know how he went to 41. I thought Trevor Keels was interesting at 42. I thought that there were interesting guys there, and we certainly know that the Kings don't have much depth on this roster. Like, who is the third string point guard, and are we sure that, like, Davion is going to be the backup point? Like, they could use another ball handler, and we don't know what the Summer League roster is going to look like, which is just right around the corner at this point. The second rounders could have been on that Summer League roster. The second rounders were really confusing to me, because I can justify Keegan, and I'm willing to give them benefit of the doubt until I see otherwise. That I think that Keegan is going to be a really good player, and maybe I'm underestimating what his ceiling is and the work ethic, and that he can continue to grow his game. It's the later picks that are confusing to me. Maybe the 47 for Sasha Vezenkov is, maybe they actually do like him. I actually was surprised when I kind of went into his film. I thought he was a pretty good shooter at the size he's at, and that maybe there's a spot. Like, I liked that potential value. 37 was a shocker, though. Like, what are you doing with a 2024 and a 2028 second round pick? Like,
from the Mavs, it's not like you made that trade with the Detroit Pistons or another team that's on the low level. I don't know. What do you think, Sean? Are we overblowing this?
No. I think, especially when it comes to Jaden Hardy, that is certainly worthy of it. I think what they're trying to do is not give roster spots. I think they've identified people that they'd rather have, and I think they're trying to keep what Monty McNair refers to as optionality open. And if it costs you, I don't agree with it, but I feel like, especially when it has someone like, there was probably 6 people that I thought were worthy of taking at 37 and keeping them on your roster. Jaden was definitely one of them, and I thought that would have been a great person to stash and look to grow and have a lot of potential with, and especially giving it to Dallas again, a team that those second round picks are essentially meaningless. I think it's frustrating. I get it. Vezenkov, I mean, at least it's a guy that I had heard of. It was somebody that's been highly touted in Europe. If people were asking me before the press conference or before even draft day, I was like, yeah, I don't think there's any way he comes over. I think it's literally just a way to you don't need 2 second round picks, and you're getting rid of the one that you don't really need. And then that blows up in the face when you get rid of the one that makes sense for 2 that you're not going to need. And again, like, the other part of that is I don't think they're going to bring him over. I don't think they're going to be able to. I think he's going to be fully content. He's 26 years old. I think he's content being the star in Europe. Hopefully he wants to come over. I don't know what the buyout situation's like. I believe his contract goes to 2024. I have no clarity on what the buyout is, but I will say if there was a level of if there was a moment that raised my eyebrows in an optimistic way, is Monty McNair seemed to think he can come to Sacramento because he started talking about what kind of fit he'd be with people on the roster and things that he can do. So
Sean,
I probably should have.
That was a
lip service, maybe.
Yes,
I know.
We're going to talk about him.
Well, I wish we had had another moment or two because I had kind of exhausted a lot of my questions already. I think I asked like 4 or 5 questions in that press conference. And
that's because I decided not to ask any questions.
Yeah, why is that, James?
Because I was just like, hey, what are you going to say? What are you going to say? Because your lips are moving and nothing's coming out.
There's a movie. I think I said this at the table last night. I don't know. I wasn't sitting at your guys' table. I was a little bit further. But there's a movie called The Big Kahuna, and it's with.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's almost like a play. It's very dialogue driven. It basically takes place in one room, and there's a salesman, and it's Kevin Spacey, Danny DeVito, and Peter Fasinelli. Peter Fasinelli comes back after this to do this task, and that he doesn't accomplish. And Kevin Spacey sits him down. He says, "I'm going to tell you something, and it's not something I tell many people because it's the equivalent of me basically telling them to go to hell." And he goes, "What is that?" And he goes, "Which is to say, I don't believe you." And
that's what I say every single night when right. Avery tells us that De'Aaron Fox is coming from the shower. I go, "Avery, I don't believe you."
So I just draw that a little bit to say that, yes, no, James was not asking questions. I'm glad he explained why. I think you were still curious as to what Monty was going to say, even if you didn't believe him.
I wanted to watch him more than I wanted to ask a question. I wanted to watch him because, like, he's a read between the lines guy for me, big time, and I also, like, he gives so little, but if you're watching, you learn more than if you're just sitting there trying to type quotes or if you're waiting to ask a question. Like, everyone in the room is going to ask the same questions. Am I at that point supposed to just fillet him and say, like, "Hey, bro, you got a 32-win team. What the F?" No. At a certain point, like, I even went on the radio with these guys and with D'Lo and Casey, and I mean, they're losing their minds. And it was like, wait. We have to wait and see what happens in the next week. Because, like, yes, like, I would like to fire somebody out of a cannon right now and make sure they land outside the city of Sacramento city limits. Sure. Like, yes. Like, I am looking at this and, like...
James is unhinged.
No, like, here's the problem. I get it when Sean says, like, this is his job. It's his everything. It's all that stuff. I disagree with that. It's takers' jobs. It's media jobs that are no longer available because this team is so trash that large organizations like The Athletic and NBC Sports no longer pay to have the team covered because they don't have any faith in the team. So, yes, it's Monty's job, but it's everyone's livelihood. If you're not going to build this thing, if we're going to have a redux of his first season where he drafted Tyrese Halliburton and then sat there on his hands and like decided that Hassan Whiteside and what was it, Glenn Robinson III were his only free agent acquisitions. No trades, no nothing. Lost Bogdanovich.
And lost James Ham.
And lost James. He froze. James' internet saved him from himself. James not wrong, by the way. He's not wrong. I understand it. He was getting to. I want to ask him when he returns, when he gets the ice to melt around him and come back. There he is. There's James back.
Melted.
So chose the perfect time to.
It did.
To, like.
I can only imagine what you screamed into your microphone just a second ago. No. I was going to ask, because you said you were watching him, and you were what was your takeaway of your observation of Monty McNair then?
Oh, he was happy. He thought he did well. But that tells me something that I don't think I like. Because if he thinks he did well, and he's the only one in the room that thinks he did well, that's a problem. Because, like, self-awareness at that moment, I looked it up because you said, hey, they probably have some ideas for all those people on the roster. As of right now, the Kings have, 9 guys on the roster. Guaranteed money, non-guaranteed money to Chimezie Metu, to Damian Jones, to Neemias Queta, to Trey Lyles, to Dante DiVincenzo. This roster, they have open roster spots. And they also have another two-way. Queta's not on a two-way. So, and they went out and they picked up a couple of guys. We'll talk about those guys in a minute. Mm-hmm. But no, I get you. The first thing he did, I put my feet up. He looks over, he smiles hey. And I'm like, oh man, you think you did good. And they can celebrate it, but a week from now, this roster better look a lot different. 10 days from now when free agency starts.
Well, free agency doesn't really start until August though. But so you got a lot of trades.
For the Kings.
Well,
no. Free agency starts June 30th.
No. Free agency doesn't start until August this year. The moratorium is August 1st through the 6th. Then you can sign after that.
Wait, so Are you sure?
Yes. Yeah.
No, I could have sworn I looked it up and it starts
No.
June
This year
30th.
it caught me by surprise too. Just a little over a week ago, because I had forgotten that it was an adjustment for this year. So you have plenty of time to sit back, do trades. Yeah, Summer League is not going to be this. I mean, it still will be a hub. There's going to be a lot of things going on, but you're not going to be bringing in free agents and the like. That will have to wait until August this year.
It's interesting.
As we're talking.
Yeah.
The whole Monty feeling good about that last night, I got the same impression, and it's interesting how I guess I took it a different way. I chose to then kind of believe him. Be like, okay, if you think this went well, then I guess we'll see how it goes. I don't agree, and I think you have a very good point that if you're the only person in the room, that's probably an issue. But
you mean in a room full of media members who...
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Their room looked to be rather celebratory.
Everybody agreed, apparently.
Yeah. Of course, that could have been churched up a bit, but I do think, I don't believe, the only part I don't believe is that it was unanimous. I believe that they're excited to get the guy. I don't think there's a single person in that room that's meh when it comes to Keegan Murray. So I don't want anyone to think that that saltiness is there from somebody like me, but
Sean, everywhere I'm looking says June 30th at 6 p.m. Eastern time.
It's I'll bring it up for you.
Okay. Yeah, because that's everything I've heard is that they moved it to June 30th last year, and they're doing it this year as well. The moratorium is 6 days.
NBA free agency doesn't. It was the. Let me see if I can find.
Oh, now I'm intrigued, because I was well under the understanding, and everywhere that I've looked says NBA free agency starts. Let's see.
This is good dead.
I'll fill a little bit with Keegan Murray while you guys research here. I think the one interesting part about Keegan Murray, and kind of like I said, I feel like at this point there's a little bit of a trend in Monty McNair's draft history. Previously, it was hard to connect dots in my mind because it was only 2 players. If you're talking about the first-round picks, Tyrese Halliburton, Davion Mitchell. And it's hard to see exactly if Monty has a type or what his certain things that he values more than others are. Especially like Tyrese just kind of fell into his lap at 12. That felt like the obvious pick. It felt like Davion Mitchell getting taken where he did was somewhat revealing about the Sacramento Kings, the position they were in. Monty McNair, like, just focus more on somebody that's going to help impact right now. And then they sold a lot about the culture and the work ethic. And I think that now, again, for the 3rd time in a row, you're getting a guy that is ready right now, has very good college production. And I think that there's a lot of value in, we know this guy's going to be good. And if he does take some outlier progression like he has previously throughout his career and his arc, then he really can be somebody good. And then the other thing about Tyrese, Davion, and now Keegan, I think every single one of those guys are players that every team in the league would love to have on their roster. I don't think there's a single team in the league that wouldn't want any of those players on the roster because they do most things on the court at an okay to above average level, and they play their role well. I think that they are just guys that you want to have on your team and should have decent value throughout the league. So they are playing it safe a little bit, but I do think that maybe I'm justifying to myself again, but I think that over time you keep getting guys that there's the guys that you want on your team that are all good complementary pieces. Eventually you're going to have a roster that has depth and has continuity and is all working well together. But I think that would take longer than what we would like, and also longer than probably most of Sacramento, including ownership, front office, and the fan base would like as well.
I'll say this too, like Jeff Petrie had a very specific type of player. He wanted shooters. He wanted high basketball IQ players. He wanted multi-positional players. I see a lot of that in what we've seen from Monty so far. It's the basketball IQ piece that I keep seeing from him, which is great because when he took over this team, like, it was not a smart team at all. Like, basketball IQ was super low as a whole. They had some players that are high basketball IQ players, but they can't make up for the basketball IQ of some of their teammates. And I think we've seen that for a couple of years. I think that at this point, they have cleared out a lot of that. Like, this team is a much smarter team than it was before. And you hope that equates to more wins. At the same time, like, talent trumps everything. You need talent in order to, be successful at the NBA level. And like, we could argue all day long that they potentially passed on one of the most talented players in the draft. And even saying that, I still don't think that it's a horrible, like, I would have taken Keegan Murray. I just wouldn't have taken him at 4. Like, I would have tried to go to 5, or I would have tried to go to 6. And I think the fear of losing Keegan Murray stopped them from maybe doing something that would have made more short-term sense for the team. And, and in doing that, they risked even long-term success of the team, because it's very possible that Ivy is a much better player down the road. But I get it. Like, Ivy didn't fit. His pairing with Fox would have been weird. Like, all of that would have been a mess. So I understand drafting Keegan. We'll just keep coming back to the same point. Like, I just couldn't have done it at 4. I needed to go to 5. And if you can't get something from 5, I get it. But it's like moving to 6, it started to become like the fear of losing him. And again, if you would have given Dyson Daniels, if you could have got Dyson Daniels in your building, maybe you fell in love with Dyson Daniels and you would have been more comfortable at 6. Maybe you fell in love with Mathurin and you would have felt more comfortable. But you didn't do that. So, round and round we go. Sean, did you find the date?
It seems to be some conflicting stuff around. I'm going to try and get some clarity on that. We can maybe either edit that out so there's no confusion.
It's okay.
And throw it in there. I saw the ESPN one that said that it definitely starts at the end, June 30th, as you said. June 30th. Then there's like Sporting News who says, "Oh, we don't know when it starts," and then there's several blogs that have linked to, "Oh, it starts in August." So,
got it.
Yeah, I think I'll get some clarity on that. We can figure that out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I would
I'm
actually
pretty sure
hope it
it's
starts earlier. I hope that's not the case for August, but I'd rather it just get done. But it almost makes it a year-round thing.
Last year it was August. They moved it back last year.
That was pandemic, yeah.
Yeah. Because the draft was a little late. Everything was a little late.
I did spend time though this morning with Fran McCaffrey.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
One of the things that stood out in talking to him, and I would encourage people to listen to that, because I feel like no matter if you're pro Keegan Murray, if you're not, if you need to be talked into it a little bit, there's two things. Yes, he's going to gush about his kid, and that's expected. But I thought there was some really nice moments in there of insight, and especially in regards to just how Keegan Murray operates and how he was this late bloomer size-wise, and how his body changed and how he wasn't heavily recruited and how he came to Iowa and how he, really blossomed in that second season. He also, I made him give him an NBA comparison, because he's talking about being able to do so much. This scorer, this guy who can stretch the floor, this guy who can pair well next to a big man, and this guy who he considers to be a lockdown defender. Certainly things that if you're a Kings fan, you're going, man, that's exactly what they need, right? But he used a name that made me raise my eyebrows. I also don't know that I believe him, but he said Grant Hill. And, Grant Hill was so much of a playmaker. I don't know that I see a lot of that in Keegan Murray, but it was just interesting because he's been around him from so long. Fran McCaffrey is a guy who has been around for so long with Iowa. He's been there since 2010. He's had stops. He kind of at different places and outlined some of the top tier talent that he's even coached himself and had encountered along his way. And Keegan Murray is the most talented player that he's basically had at his tutelage, and he's thrilled for him. And and the other part he did is he outlined, because he was incredibly complimentary of the Kings organization in the way that they scouted this kid, how much they'd seen him. They came to him and spent time with him, did a lot of that groundwork early on. And I think it made an impression on him, especially for a guy who originally wasn't recruited very highly and then finds himself in the mix of a top 5 pick. But I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you can glean a lot from it, and certainly to hear what these guys talk about the Kings are getting in this kid is pretty insightful, I thought, especially coming off the season that he's coming off of, where he was the tournament MVP for the Big Ten.
Yeah, again, I really like Keegan Murray, and I like that the Kings were hot on him. I like his fit. I like everything about it. Again, your coach is going to say a whole lot of good things about you, but I also like what you said about him not being recruited and how the Kings recruited him, basically. And I think that that's a good thing. He is going to feel loved, but almost every player that comes to Sacramento feels love. When they get here, it's totally different than what they thought, and they usually end up falling in love with the city. The one thing I will tell you is that his usage at Iowa was close to 30%. It was huge. I mean, it was right around what De'Aaron Fox's usage rate is, and his assist rate is where Harrison Barnes is. It's 10%. It's not good. So I think that there are things that he does that will not translate at all. There's not going to be 4 post-ups a game for Keegan Murray. That's just not going to happen. And if it does, that's going to be really strange, because the Kings have never done post-ups, and the post-ups have kind of gone away in the NBA, and they have Sabonis, and if there are going to be any post-ups, it's going to go to Sabonis. So that's one thing. Secondly, the three-point shot should translate. A lot of what he does should translate. Shot blocks, he's not going to block 1.9 shots per game. Just my opinion, he'll be right around 1. He'll get you what John Collins could get you. He is decent that way, but watching film on him, a lot of his shots, the blocks that he got, were because he was just hanging out in the key, and that doesn't happen at the NBA level. You're not allowed to just hang around the key and wait to go do a help block. That doesn't happen, and so a huge amount of his blocks were in that kind of scenario. So I think he's going to be a good defensive player. I don't think he's going to be great. I think he'll be league average and maybe slightly above league average. I don't think he'll be locked down, but I have no problems with that. I think he'll be a good scorer. I don't think he'll be a great scorer. I don't think he'll I heard his conversation with you. He thinks that he'll average 10 rebounds a game.
Yeah, I don't see that.
No, and 20 points, I don't see either. Like if he gets to a point where he's 18 and 8, that would be great. But even that is a little high. I would say like 6.5 to 7.5 rebounds a game. Like I really like him. I think he's going to be a really good starter for the Kings for a long time.
Yeah.
Brenden?
I think the transition game is going to be really good too. I think that Keegan is really, really good in transition. I think his first step is underwhelming, but once he gets 2 or 3 and a head of steam going downhill, I thought that he was a force in transition, and we know that Sacramento, I'm assuming that with Mike Brown, they'll still be a very high-paced offense, and De'Aaron Fox, and I think Sabonis fits that style as well if he's playing the 5 and able to get boards and take it himself, and those are his outlet options. I'm kind of selling myself on the fact that I'm talking myself into, maybe I'm wrong and there is more potential. And the only way
he's reached acceptance.
I'm just trying to present the other side. I don't believe that it will happen, but there is, look at year 1 to year 2 at Iowa for Keegan Murray. Nobody expected him to take that sort of leap. And is that because of the character? Is it a more opportunity with Luka Garza gone? Is it his work ethic? It's probably a combination of a little bit of everything. But maybe a guy that is able to take an outlier leap like that has another one due at some point in his future. Because in my mind, if Keegan Murray is able to put the ball on the deck a little bit more and attack closeouts, then finishing at the rim, it gets a little bit more appealing, where I think he's been interesting. And defensively, I agree with you, James. I kind of think that the block numbers and even the steal numbers are a bit maybe give off the wrong impression. I don't think he's that type of help defender that is changing your defense. I think he's a part of a really good defense. I think that he's a solid on-ball defender and versatile in that way. I don't think he's somebody that's out there causing havoc for opposing offenses, forcing turnovers. It's certainly going to be an improvement from the low starting point that the Kings fours were at last season, but I don't think he's a phenomenal difference maker in that end. So I'm talking to myself into where maybe there is potential upside, but I still think that he's going to fit no matter what. But maybe there is that next level of growth, and I'm reading this wrong.
Yeah,
There's also this. Go ahead, James.
Rationalizing, and now he's accepting.
Yep.
There's also this.
I wouldn't have said that last night. Any of that right there.
Yeah.
This photo that I ran across last night, which I thought was pretty interesting, where they put the top 3 picks there. It's kind of hard to see, but there we go. Maybe that. Let me angle it right. I don't know if you can.
For anyone not watching on YouTube,
yeah,
it's the top 3 guys and then Jaden Ivey. All in
There's
their
a
draft
noticeable
stats.
absence, and he was there. He was there.
Yeah, but they weren't able to get him to go talk to us. I mean, again, no, I mean that's part of it. Like again, it's unfortunate. The Kings just they lost a lot of people, and so they are in the midst of hiring.
They'll figure it out. They'll figure that out.
They will. They will figure it out.
It was unfortunate last night.
Okay, so we've got Sasha Vezenkov, and then the Kings actually signed Keon Ellis, according to Shams, from Alabama to a 2A, and they also got Jariah Horn from Tulsa. Jariah Horn, his path to the NBA. First of all, he's like older than Brenden, I think.
His first year in college was De'Aaron Fox's freshman year.
Yeah, so he started in Nebraska, transferred to Tulsa, left Tulsa to go. Where did he go? Colorado.
Left Tulsa to go to Colorado. Yeah,
and then went back to Tulsa. So he's like a 40-year-old man who's still in college. But Jariah Horn, 6'7", 220, can shoot the rock, can defend, long defender. They signed him. I think that's probably a summer contract or an Exhibit 10 contract. Maybe he gets an invite to training camp. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's part of G League squad. Maybe he's not. But Keon Ellis is at least intriguing. One of the better defenders, especially perimeter defenders in the draft. And like he looks like a decent 3-and-D guy, measured in at like 6'4" and 3/4 at the combine, not the 6'6" that he was listed as, but a good shooter and kind of a fierce defender. A 2A, like we don't know how that will work out because the Kings haven't had great success there. But like, any thoughts on those guys?
Keon interests me. I think that he's intriguing. Like I said, they don't have, in my mind, a third string point guard. And I think that Keon is an interesting spot for that, where I think he's a solid on-ball defender, especially fighting through screens. And I think that most of Sacramento's guards are pretty horrible at fighting through screens. Even Davion, I think, has his struggles there, even though he's phenomenal in isolation. And then Keon, offensively, he's not a guy that you want to have the ball in his hands initiating offense. I think he's just kind of a catch-and-shoot guy and can cut as well. I think there's intrigue. I'm definitely going to watch a whole lot of Keon Ellis today and probably talk myself too much into him. And to be fair, I also very much believed in Robert Woodard and Jemias Ramsey when they got picked. I think just spending a lot of time going through these second rounders, I'm going to end up believing in, or at least seeing how it could work. And again, until I'm like, all right, yeah, this isn't happening.
If you do that and you don't watch Swingers, I'm going to be so pissed off. You're talking about guys that are, come on, man.
I'm going to actually take the James strategy and watch both at the same time.
No, don't do that.
Why not? All in one sitting, though?
It's money,
Does that make
baby.
it better?
Come on.
And then I don't know much about Jariah Horn as of now, except for kind of what you went through a bit, and I'll get more familiar on him in due time here. But I think that Sasha Vazenkov is intriguing to me. I do think that the three-point shooting that he showed over in the EuroLeague and being on the All-EuroLeague team this year, he had like MVP consideration, and the shooting at his size, I think he does a decent job putting the ball on the floor and moving it. Like defensively, I think he's a negative, but he has okay moments. I think that there's a chance that the reason, because like Sean said, he's a star in Europe right now. Like, I could see why somebody would just want to stay as a star in the position that he's in. He seems to be in a pretty good spot in the EuroLeague. But the Kings don't exactly have anything going on at the backup four right now, in my mind, locked in. I think if he worked, which there's nothing saying he will, I have no clue, that there could be a role for him here. Like, maybe some of these other teams that had his rights, like, I don't know if I want to come over. How many minutes am I really going to play? Am I riding the bench? Like, if Sacramento really likes him and thinks that there's an opportunity for him to be the backup four and he gets a legit opportunity, then maybe that's a reason that he's willing to come over. But who knows? Probably not a major impact guy or anything like that, but I could see it potentially working.
Yeah, I like the tape on him. Maybe Maxi Clyburn. Maybe a little bit of like Omri Caspi, but with I think he's a little clunkier with his feet. But a decent athlete, pretty smooth, like fluid, and he can shoot the ball. Like I didn't hate it either, but I don't think he's coming over, and I think they just sold the pick, and they don't want to say that, and so we'll see how it goes. Okay, let's get to the business of basketball, because I think Sean has fallen asleep.
No, it is July 1st for start of free agency. I just opened up a can of worms, and I'm going through some. My phone keeps blowing up, so we're good.
Gotcha.
That's a good business of basketball with the start of free agency. Sorry for the bad intel there.
No, it's okay. Yeah, the start of free agency is June 30th at 3 p.m. Pacific time, but you can't actually sign anybody. There's a moratorium and all that. I think it's still like the 6th is the day. July 6th is the day you can actually sign somebody. The Kings have some decisions to make there. We should find out about Trey Lyles like anytime. whether they extended the qualifying offer to Dante DiVincenzo. We'll find that at any time. I expect them to probably renounce the rights to guys like Josh Jackson's just to make sure that they have cap space, whatever cap space they do have. They don't have a ton of cap space. But I guess let's start there. Like, what do you think happens from here until, like, the first week of free agency? How many rotational spots do the Kings replace? How many players do you expect they add? Like, is there any trade that you think that might happen? What is it that you're looking at that says, okay, this team can go from, 35, 36 wins to 45, or is that way out of the possibility?
I was told to not have any expectations. I don't know.
No, it's true.
That is true. Expectations.
I don't know, man. Like, the draft may have completely done it. For me, it doesn't. Like, I was expecting some chaos around the draft. There really wasn't a lot of trades, not a lot of movement for the second straight year, and I have that expectation as well. As I think we all share that they're going to be active again, because that's the best way to make your team any better. I think it'll be disappointing if you go into the season where you don't really have trades. You had to rely on some free agency where previous free agencies have not been kind to you. And if that's the case, then you're in for a world of hurt starting opening night.
Yeah, I think that the one that stands out to me for sure is Richaun Holmes. And I think HB to a lesser extent, but Holmes, to me, if he's on the roster at the beginning of the year, like, just what is happening? I think that another potential trend that we're starting to see as this offseason goes on, and now that this is the third with Monty McNair, is that maybe it's not that he's not a closer, it's that, like, he's just overvaluing his assets. Like, maybe the reason that you never feel like you're getting enough value for your guys is because you're valuing them too high. And I think that if you're holding on to Richaun Holmes because you're not happy with what you're potentially getting in return, and Holmes is not the same personality as a Buddy Hield, a Marvin Bagley. I don't think it's an issue necessarily in the locker room or anything like that, but you're holding on to an asset and not getting the most value out of it. And I think that's where the issue comes. And we've seen this a couple times now with Bogdan Bogdanovic. How many summers has it, or off seasons and deadlines has it been of Harrison Barnes talk? And we've heard things about deals that I think are okay returns for Harrison Barnes. And now we're going into what's going to be the last year of him. Is there a chance he ends up walking for absolutely nothing after all of this? I think that you could be running into the same situation with Richaun Holmes. I think that maybe it's the same situation with the 4th overall pick that we just saw. And I just think that there has to be more moves. And Richaun Holmes is the one for me that I just don't see how Monty in the front office can sit there and just wait for a deal that they like again, because that's what keeps happening, and it threw away all of last season.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I still believe that Harrison Barnes will be traded between now and the start of the season. To me, like, does he fit with Keegan Murray? Sure he does. But I don't think he's signing an extension. And if you can't get him to sign an extension this summer, then he needs to find a new home right now. What you don't want is, the possibility for an injury or something to make it so you lose him for nothing, that you can't trade him at the deadline. And then what happens if you're playing really well at the deadline and, you can't trade him because you take a step back? Well, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to retain him during the summer. So I would shop him heavy right now. I do think that they've limited themselves because I think there are more power forward types that are available right now than there are small forward types that are available. But you got to start listening to offers like nonstop. And I'm really surprised that we just got through, the draft and he's still on the team. But I also that's because that's the one moment where, you can get other assets, different types of assets that mean something to someone else. And so I don't know. I do expect him to be on the move. I expect them to try to revamp this roster. But whether they can do that or not, like Like I thought that they could have revamped the roster before the trade deadline last year. I thought that they could have moved the pick and done something this year. I thought they could have moved their pick last year and done something different. And every time that I think we kind of think that they might do something, they don't. And so I am intrigued to see what happens here. But like, you're on the clock because this team just is flat out. It's just not good enough.
Definitely.
As it sits right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, how I weirdly think, and my issue has been beyond.
Here he goes with another Jaden Ivey take.
Well,
It's
no,
happening. It's happening.
my issue has been beyond the first round of the playoffs and how do you get past that, right? But I do think that their roster totally could get to the playoffs.
Right
I think
now?
if they get something for Holmes, yeah, it's. I think that the
Sean
roster.
always says until they prove they can do it, they
Right.
can't do
They
gotta
it.
see it
should.
first.
They should. No, okay. So I think that even last year's talent level, they underperformed for the talent level, and there were obviously a handful of complications. Buddy and Bagley being moved on from, and that kind of just bad feeling around the team and it being infectious. I think that should be moved on from, although, you never know if it's a slow start, what could creep back up at any point. You're going to have the same coach the entire year, and I really do think 60 games of Fox and Sabonis is such a substantial difference than the 15 you got last year. Like, last year was such a mess. I do feel like last year they significantly underperformed their talent level, in my mind. I think that basing it off like they were a 30-win team last year, like, yeah, that's what they came away with. I think that if you are able to actualize the talent on the roster and optimize it, that they should have been better than that. And I think that there are ways that this team is a 9 seed next year. I think that they have the ability to be I was going to say much improved defense, but that's also from a pretty low starting point. But they can throw a lineup out there now that all of a sudden is maybe pretty good on defense. Like, can you put a Davion Mitchell, Dante DiVincenzo, Harrison Barnes, Keegan Murray, Domantas Sabonis? Like, all of a sudden, maybe it's just me like craving watching defense and getting a stop every once in a while. But I'm like, hey, that's a lineup right there, and that doesn't even have your best player in it. Like, I do think
Brendan's
that
full
they're
Tony Harvey.
yes. I think.
How about this though? You still said 9 seed, right?
Yeah,
Not playoffs.
you're right. And this is where yes, but it would be a feel-good story for next season.
You can just say you think they're improved with just Fox and a full season of Fox and Sabonis, and I would agree with you. And yeah, certainly you can add Keegan Murray because I do think he could be impactful. And I would agree with you. To say playoffs at this point.
No, you're right. You're right.
Way away. They're
Postseason.
Three players right now.
Postseason
three
with the
that they
play-in
have.
tournament.
Well, the postseason, but the drought still refers to postseason. Like, it's its own little thing. Like the play-in scenario. Okay, great, you're there, but that doesn't mean anything.
Steve Clifford just took the Charlotte job.
How about that? He's
Wow.
back. He's back, baby. He's back.
He is back. Yeah.
I guess my point to close this out is, wouldn't a 40-win team, which I don't think is that far out of the picture, wouldn't that be a really feel-good story coming off what it was last year? Again, my issue is I don't know how they improve from that, but I think it would make for a pretty fun year next year that the fan base would really enjoy. Like, I think that there's a chance that they are playing competitive basketball that's enjoying to watch, and they're not the crap show that we saw last year. Where it gets difficult, admittedly, is when you look at the rest of the West, because I can look at it and be like, oh, man, I like this roster. You can make some fun lineups, but are you better than even the Portland Trailblazers? Like Sean said, who got Damian Lillard back. They also traded for Jeremy Grant, which, by the way, they had a first-round pick that they were willing to get rid of because they traded CJ McCollum before. Maybe if Sacramento had moved Harrison Barnes at a previous deadline and had a first-round pick, that's something they would have been comfortable giving up, because maybe they don't want to give up their own first-round picks because those tend to be pretty valuable. The Blazers also got Shaedon Sharpe. And if he ends up working out well, their timeline looks a whole lot better than the Kings. So I definitely can admit, like, while I'll look at the Kings roster and I think that I'm going to enjoy watching Kings basketball a lot more next year, and I do think there is value in that, and maybe I'm just talking myself into it. At the same time, the surrounding teams in the West make it pretty tough.
A 10-win jump in the NBA is nearly impossible, especially with adding one rookie. Even if you're talking about health and everything else, like it's really, really difficult. And I'll go back to the last year, Dave Yeager, when they won 39, and then they came back the next year, and I thought, okay, Luke Walton should be able to figure this out, and they went backwards, and that's
as a lot of teams do.
They
you
do.
get a brand new head coach, and things change.
Yeah, I thought that they had done enough that hey, I could see them getting at least a little bump here. All right, let's close this out. Final thoughts, Sean. You got any final thoughts?
Oh, I'm glad the draft is over. I'm looking forward to Summer League, man. I actually really am. I'm looking forward to.
Are you going to Vegas?
I'll be in Vegas, but I'm looking for I'm looking forward to seeing Mike Brown in action with his staff, with some players that mainly won't be on the team when it comes to Summer League, but you can kind of get a feel for what they're trying to do, what that staff looks like, how it has to be completed hopefully here in the next I would imagine couple weeks. I believe Lindsey Harding will be a part of the team. I still think she will be there. I'm not so sure about Rico Hines, but those previous staff members who were up in the air, they're coming. Their contracts draw to a close here in this final week. So July 1st is the start of the new NBA season. I know there was a confusion about free agency earlier on my part, but yeah, even if free agency had started in August, the new start of the season is technically July 1st. So that part I definitely knew, but free agency was obviously, as James mentioned earlier, and we saw those reports, I was able to finally clear that up. But I think to see Mike Brown, his staff around these guys, there's going to be a lot of focal point on Keegan Murray. I'm looking forward to see it. Cal Classic in San Francisco before it goes to Vegas, and hopefully some practice time before these guys hit the court. And that game in Vegas where it's going to be Sacramento versus Orlando, where Keegan Murray and Paolo Banchero get to face off, could be very, very interesting.
Brenden, final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely could be interesting. I know it probably sounds like I'm overcorrecting or going through stages on this pod compared to the last few. I think that I went a little stir crazy from talking about the same stuff in the draft process, and totally still am with all the. I think Jaden Ivey was, or getting something along with Murray. Like, I don't like the valuation of pick 4, but after Keegan is taken and he's the guy, I can't help but look forward to watching Keegan Murray. I think that he's a player that I really enjoy. That I'm going to enjoy, and he's the type of player that Sacramento did need. I don't love the valuation, and I kind of just honestly feel bad that he's going to have this Jaden Ivey thing attached to him forever. I guess that's just the nature of the NBA, and guys who are taken high in a draft, that's going to end up happening. But it's a weird situation. So I think that I'm really excited to watch Keegan. I think that the fan base is going to absolutely love him. And by next pod, I'll probably be way too excited about Keon Ellis.
There it is. Okay, so I'll finish up with this. We've got all kinds of things happening. We'll switch gears starting on Tuesday. We'll jump into free agency talk. There is no Jaden Ivey, so Brenden can't get stuck on Jaden Ivey and free agency. There is a Royal Ivey. Maybe Royal Ivey can come out of retirement and
That'd
help
be good.
Brenden out there. We can talk
Actually,
about
no,
Royal Ivey.
That would not be good.
It would not be good. But look, this is going to be a fast-moving machine that happens here over the next 10 days, 15 days, going right from free agency into Cal Classic, into Summer League. Sean will be in Vegas. I'm not going to go to Vegas. I'm going to enjoy my boat a whole bunch. But we'll still have pods every single Tuesday and Thursday. We'll have a roving correspondent there, which is awesome. Brenden and I think are both going to Cal Classic.
I might be in Vegas too, actually.
Oh,
I think
Brandon's
there's
going
a good
to Vegas.
chance. Yeah.
All right. Well, get that media credential. Get that media credential quick. Yeah. So it should be an interesting week and a half, 2 weeks as we build up to the true off season, which won't even happen until the third week of July, maybe the fourth week of July. But yeah, it should be a fun run here. Okay, we've done final thoughts. Make sure if you're still watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Subscribe to the Kings Beat. Jump on board. We'll post the video that Sean will drop it in down below with the head coach from Iowa that Sean had. So I'll have a link of that down below in the description, so you can go find Sean's good work there. And I think that'll do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. So for Fox 40's Sean Cunningham, and of course Brenden Nunes from the Kings Herald and the Kings Pulse podcast, I'm James Hamby, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. We'll see you on Tuesday.